Hello everyone, it's Stephanie here, and today I have a video sharing a card I'm creating with our new card kit called Birds of a Feather. This card kit has these great dies here where we have a bunch of different bird designs. There's also flowers and leaves and a couple of hearts. And I thought it would be really fun to turn all of these different elements into a wreath. So I went ahead and die cut a whole bunch of these from white cardstock, and I'm going to color all of these with Copic markers. Now, if you want to save time and skip this step, you can definitely cut out all of these pieces from colored cardstock or pattern papers, and then you can quickly and easily create the wreath without all of the coloring. But I decided I wanted to be able to kind of customize it with the colors I wanted, and I wanted to add a little bit of shading to the different flowers and the bird. So I'm going to go ahead and color all of these with Copics. Now you can see here that the first thing I'm coloring is the little tiny hearts, and they are super teeny tiny. So to color these, I like to just kind of roll my marker right over top of them. It's kind of hard to hold onto them, especially with my chubby little fingers. So I just like to kind of lay it on my work surface and then roll that marker over top until it's fully covered. Now I have 5 hearts here colored, and I don't end up using them all, but I just kind of figure it's easier to do all of my coloring at once and do lots of different pieces, and then I can kind of piece everything together and not run out when I'm starting to assemble the card. So I'm just going to go through all of the coloring of the different elements, and I have this pretty sped up just because it's very simple coloring. I'm just using usually 2 colors, sometimes 3, depending on how large the area is that I'm coloring. And I'm just adding a base layer of color, and then I'm going in with some darker color just to provide that bit of shading on the different elements. And you'll see that some of the leaves and flowers that I do end up coloring I don't use in the finished project, and that's no problem. I'll just set these aside and use them in another project down the road. So now I've finished all the leaves, I'm moving on to the flowers, and I kind of picked out a color palette that I thought would look really nice together. I have some really nice muted purples, I have some aqua colors for the bird, and then I'm going to use some corally pink colors and some yellows for the additional flowers. For the bird, I ended up using 3 colors since he is kind of larger. I was able to do some really great shading on him, and he has a separate wing that you can attach with some dimension, so I did color that separately, and I will add that onto the finished project with some foam adhesive. I also decided to do some of the flowers with the aqua color as well. I like to kind of do things in 3s, especially for a wreath design, so I can kind of position them in a triangle pattern on the wreath and have that same color kind of represented in the triangle form. So that's why I like to kind of have 3 of each of the colors so that I can kind of mix and match those. So you'll kind of see how I do that when I do the final wreath design. So I'm just finishing up now and doing these larger pink flowers, and then I'm going to do a couple of small ones as well that I won't end up using. I'm coloring these the same way I did the hearts since they are kind of small. I'm just kind of rolling my marker over top, and I'm not adding any additional color. So now I have all of my die cut pieces ready to go. Everything is colored, and I have a panel of white cardstock here that measures 4 inches by 5 1/4. And what I want to do is I want to create a circular shape that I can use as a guide for my wreath. So I find it easiest just to use my circle stacks dies and pick out a circle in the size that I want, and then I just die cut it and use that die cut shape as a template. So I'm just kind of positioning this onto my panel, and I'm going to use a pencil and draw around it so that I have a faint pencil line to use as my guide. So now I can start working on the layout of the wreath design. So I know going in that I don't want this entire long piece of leaves here. I want the bottom to be cut off. So I'm going to do that first so that these are all ready to go, and then I'm going to start to lay everything out on my wreath. So when I do this initially, I don't adhere anything down. I like to kind of get an idea of how I want everything to be on the wreath before I glue it down, just so I'm not committing to a design that I'm going to end up not liking. So you'll kind of see here, I'm just going to kind of speed this up, but I'm going to leave the process in that I kind of go through as I move everything around and create my wreath. I decided to only have 1 bird in the design since the bird is quite large compared to the circle area that I'm working with. So I positioned that on the bottom left of the wreath where I knew I wanted him to kind of sit. And then I'm going to work around the rest of the wreath, adding the different flowers and leaves. I only ended up using the 1 larger leaf there, that one with the hole detail in it, and then I didn't use the long skinny solid ones. They were just a little bit too big and they looked kind of out of place with the rest of the elements. So I kind of concentrated the greenery on just those long multi-leaf vine ones. I love how they kind of peek out from the wreath and you can kind of change the direction of them. So they were a lot of fun and worked a lot better with the size of the flowers. Now for the sentiment, I'm going to use the Simply Hello and Love You die-namics, which is this month's free with 60. And I'm going to cut it from a piece of cardstock that I'm coloring with Copic markers. And I just am doing this so that it perfectly matches the coloring I already did on all of the elements. So I just kind of created an ombre area that I could die cut from. And you can see now that I have this really great ombre die cut word. And that's going to be the sentiment on the card. So I just have that positioned there, and now I'm going to start to adhere everything down. I'm happy with the design. I took a photo on my phone just in case anything kind of gets pushed off of the card, and I have that beside me for reference as I move these aside and start to adhere them down. Now for die cuts this size, I like to use a liquid glue pen just because it's small and easy to attach the adhesive. And then I also used a little bit of foam adhesive on some of the flowers and the bird wing just to add a little bit of dimension. I really love these scrapbook adhesives thin 3D foam squares. They're a little bit thinner than a standard foam square, and they had just the perfect amount of dimension for someone who doesn't love a lot of bulk on their cards. I used those same foam squares for the wing on the bird just to give that a little bit of dimension as well, and then everything else is adhered flat to the wreath. So once I had everything fully adhered, I did decide that that pink flower right beside the bird was a little bit too plain, so I decided to add one more vine and kind of tuck it in behind the bird and overlap it on the flower, and I really loved the final result of that. So now it's time to add our sentiment. So what I like to do for the sentiment is I position the first letter where I want it to be on the card, and then I'm taking the panel that we had die cut from, and I'm going to use that as a template to be able to adhere the rest of my letters perfectly straight and perfectly centered together. So I'm just going to kind of hold that in place, and I'm adding adhesive to the back of each of these letters. And then I'm just going to position them into the openings. This is going to ensure that the letters are perfectly spaced and everything is lined up correctly. And then I can quickly just remove that template once I have everything adhered, and then I have a perfectly placed sentiment on my card front. And then lastly, to finish this design, I'm going to add my third heart, and I'm going to position that right beside the word hello just to kind of bring that design down from the wreath right into the sentiment. I kind of like how it brings everything together and makes the whole image look completely cohesive with the sentiment on the card. Now, one of my favorite things to do when I create a wreath design is I like to take a dot stamp and kind of stamp a bunch of little gray dots all around the wreath in the little openings just to kind of add a little bit more detail and fill up some of the white space. But since I wanted to only use the dies for this design, I took one of the flowers that had a bunch of little dots in the center. And it was a little bit cumbersome, but I loved the final result, so it was totally worth it for me. I just used a Copic marker and colored in the center of the flowers and popped out those little pieces. And now I'm adding them to the wreath design kind of in different areas where I want to fill in some of the space. And then once I have them in position, I'm just going to use a glue pen and drop a little bit of glue down and then just kind of lay them on top. And that's going to adhere them onto the card and give me that little bit of extra detail that I like to add without actually having to use any stamps. I was able to use the dies that I already had in this kit. Okay, so now that we have our wreath fully completed and everything is adhered to the card, I'm just going to add a few little details to really step up the design. So the first thing we need to do is add an eye to our bird, and there is a little die cut piece that pops out of there, but it's super teeny tiny. So I decided just to use a black pen and color that area in. And now I'm taking a white gel pen and I'm going to add a little bit of detail to some of the elements on the wreath. So for the bird and some of the leaves, I'm adding a little bit of a highlight area with my gel pen. I'm also using it to add some detail to the purple flowers. So for those ones, since I have a large area to work with, I'm doing a cluster of white dots in the center. And then on the yellow flowers, I'm adding one large dot to each of those centers. And that is going to complete our wreath design. So now to finish off the card, I'm just adding my finished panel to my card base, which is a periwinkle card base. And I'm just positioning that right in the center so I have a nice purple border around the outside edge, which is going to match the flowers in my wreath. So that is going to finish today's card. We have this beautiful die cut wreath that we've created with only elements from the new Birds of a Feather card kit. So you can see how versatile this kit really is. There's a lot of great ways that you can use all of the flowers, leaves, and the bird images. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. I hope you got some ideas on ways to use these new dies, and I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching.